Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first poem for horror literature. We are going to be reading the Der Vampire, the first. There's so much to talk about when it comes to this poem, so just bear with me. I'm going to go through a couple of things before we actually get into the poem. Now, one thing I want to explain to you is your homework for this and every poem or short story that we read. You're going to fill out a vampire story page. Now, there are separate directions on my Google page for how to fill out a vampire story page, but very quickly, I just want to show you what you need to do. So let me open it up. Okay, vampire story page. Here it is right here. You should be taking a look at it on your screen. It's very simple. You have one of three positions that you're going to choose. That's on the directions. Choose one of the following three positions. Now, up top, please just fill this out. Put in your name, put in the date, put in the period. That's easy. Now, the title of the source, that's the place where you will type in Der Vampire. It says poem or short story. Is this a poem or a short story? This would be a poem, so you type in poem or highlight poem. Who is the author? The author is by Heinrich August Assenfelder. You can just write the last name if you'd like, Assenfelder. And then the year published. This was published in, and it says it right here, 1748. So you would fill that in right there as well. Now, you're going to read the poem. Now, I'm going to read it for you right now. You can come back and rewatch me reading this several times so you can understand it the best that you can. After you read the poem, you're going to choose one of three positions. One, you're going to choose whether or not it is a vampire story, and you're going to give me three reasons and three quotes. So, I mean, the first reason could just be very simply, I believe this is a vampire story because of the title, Der Vampire. And then your supporting quote, you could just put in the title, the first, Der Vampire, in quotation marks, and you're out the door. And then, the second and the third reason, actually, we'll have to read the poem. You'll come up with reasons why you believe it is a vampire story, and then give the quote to support it. Should be no problem. Make sure you put the quote in quotation marks and you spell it, you spell every word correctly, you get the quote correct, so that if you're using it in your essay in a couple of months, the end of the semester, it's all here for you. You don't even have to go back to the poem. You can go back to this sheet. That's the purpose of these sheets. These are providing you with quotes that you can use when you're writing your essay in a month or two or three or at the end of the semester. And then you would do that give three reasons why you believe it's a vampire story. Now, continuing on, you can tell me why you believe it's not a vampire story if that's what you believe after reading the poem. And again, give me three reasons and three quotes from the poem to support it. And of course, the last thing that you can choose is you believe it's not a vampire story, but you can see why some people might mistake it for one. Okay. I'm going to tell you now that we're going to be doing research logs. Let me go back to where you can see my ugly mug. We're going to be reading research. We're going to be doing research logs, which is once a week. You're going to be doing some research on vampires. The first research topic is going to be vampire characteristics. You'll get getting that done for me this week. It'll be due next week at the end of the week. And I'm telling you now, once you have that done, everything's going to kind of open up for you because you're going to know what to look for. Vampire characteristics, things like they get more powerful at midnight and less powerful at noon. They can burn in the sun. They can fly. They can control certain animals. There's a ton of things, at least a dozen things that make somebody a vampire or something a vampire. And once you have that list, you're armed with it. Noticing it in poems and short stories is going to be so much easier. I know that. That's a vampire characteristic. This is clearly a vampire because, and then you give the quote. Should be no problem. All right, so let's talk about the poem, Der Vampire itself. In fact, let's talk about poetry itself. Now, poetry is not something that I enjoy teaching so much because it is very difficult to understand, right? This person wrote this poem in 1748. How the heck can I tell you what they actually meant? So what I have to do is give my best guesses based upon the stories themselves, my experiences, my research, my history, as to what the poem means. Now, can I, your teacher, tell you definitively what a poem necessarily means? It has to mean this. There's no other choice besides meaning this. No, not really, and I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'll tell you now, I got kicked out of a sophomore English class way back in 1989 at Montclair High School because I argued with an English teacher. She told me what a poet, I believe it was Elizabeth, oh God, what's her name? Whatever, it doesn't matter. maybe Browning, whatever. She told me what a poem meant, and I raised my hand and I said, but I believe it means something else. And I gave her my reason, and she yelled at me and told me, no, she's the English teacher. She knows better, and that I should be quiet and keep my opinions to myself. Well, that's not the type of person I am, so I did not keep my opinion to myself, and I ended up getting kicked out of the class. At the end of it all, I was wrong for being rude to her, which I did get kind of rude to her at the end. But she was wrong completely for not allowing my opinion. So I'm going to tell you now, your opinion on what these poems mean means more than my opinion on what these poems mean. Every time, as long as you can back it up with the reasons why. I believe because blank. Okay. With all that being said, how do you learn and how do you deal with a new poem or any poem? My suggestion is to read it several times over, especially if it's short. And if it's long, it's going to be hard to read it several times over, but certainly read it line by line and break it down line by line. Also very important, if you can do any research on the poem itself, right? If you can find out any information, maybe summaries by the author or by, learned English people. Maybe you could look at their ideas and then you could pull it all together and get a good idea of what a poem means. So let's look at this poem, The First Den of Vampire. Now, there's a couple things also I want to talk to you about. We're going to be talking about this throughout this class, so I don't want anybody to get upset or think I'm forcing anything down your throats or making you believe anything, because I'm not. But understand this. Catholicism and religion is going to be a big part of this class, huge part of this class. The Catholic Church has a lot to say about vampires, right? In fact, you're going to find out when we do our research on how to kill a vampire that how to kill or repel a vampire, almost all of the ways, well, a lot of the ways have to do with the Catholic Church. Holy water, Bibles, anything having to do with God themselves. You're going to find out that vampires can't touch church doors that fly off it and whatnot. They can't touch anything having to do with the church. Now, it is my secret opinion. And just remember, let's back it up even a second. The purpose of this class is not to read vampire literature. Just worked out that way. The purpose of this class is to teach you how to write a really great research paper. So we're using the vampire legends in order to write the research paper, right? I forgot what I was talking about. Anyway, so let's just continue. Now, I remember my thought. I believe, by the way, your essay topic, now remember two things. Your essay topic is why and how is the vampire legend still so popular 400 or 500 years later after we first saw it, 300 years later? In other words, why does the vampire legend still endure? And why does it have such popularity? If it's something fake, why do so many people know about it? And think about it, everybody knows about the vampire legend, from kids to adults. It is my secret belief that the Catholic Church invented the vampire legend, just made it up, cold cloth, out of nothing, in order to put people into the church. Because if you could find people and you could say to them, if you don't believe in God, if you don't follow this religion of one God, then vampires are going to come. They're going to eat you. They're going to hurt you miserably. They're going to kill you, or even worse, they're going to turn you into a vampire, and you are going to lose your very soul for eternity, and you'll never be able to go to heaven, and you'll never know the bliss of God's grace, if you believe all that stuff. I believe the Catholic Church made it all up to scare people. That might be one of your topics that you'll use when you write your essay. I believe the vampire legend has endured for many, many reasons. One, all the sex. Boom. People love to see that and read about that. Good. I agree with that, by the way. All the violence, the blood and the violence. People like that as well. Because of all of their super characteristics and superpowers. People want these super characteristics and superpowers, right? Another reason Mr. Kenny believes is because the Catholic Church invented it and has kept it thriving in order to get people's butts in the pews at church. Scare people enough and they might believe what you're selling. They might buy what you're selling. I absolutely believe that. Now, with all of that being said, still, you have to understand something. Before Catholicism swept into Europe in like the 12, 13, 14, 1500s, right? Now, remember, not a history teacher. I'm just giving you basic historical facts, just throwing them out there as ideas, not specific. So if a history teacher watches this, they're going to be like, what is this guy talking about? He doesn't have that specifically correct. And I'd say, yes, I know. I'm okay with that. Just know this. before Catholicism came onto the scene and monks came in and, they went to the Visigoths and all the barbarians of Europe and they said, you're going to believe this. This is what we believe for the various reasons. Know this. Everybody, not everybody, but most people believed in multiple gods before Catholicism, which is a monotheistic religion, came in. You had these people called pagans, and pagans believed in multiple gods, right? You have the god of air, god of water, god of fire, god of wind, right? You have all these different gods, and they would pray to these gods because they didn't understand. Mostly, the idea of paganism comes from the fact that people don't understand the reality. Why is there an earthquake? Well, it must be a god shaking the earth because it's so mad at us. Why, was there this crazy storm last night? Oh, the gods are angry, right? They're telling us something. So we have a lot of that was going on. Now, in the Middle Ages, all of a sudden you had Catholics came in and they brought their church with them, right? And they brought this idea of one God or Jesus. I mean, on the other side, you also had Buddhism with Buddha, and Muslims have one God as well, and Muhammad, or preacher or prophet, right? Again, I'm not a teacher, not a religious teacher, I'm a teacher, an English teacher, not a history or religion teacher. This is just basic information. So what happened was, and this poem is going to talk about it, you had this clash between people believing in one God, in this case, God himself, right? The Catholic Church, Christianity, and these pagans. So how do you get people to stop believing in multiple gods and paganism? Well, one way was to scare them, right? To tell them that if you come to God, then you don't have to worry about these awful, crazy things called vampires. They will not come and eat you because you can use God as a defense against that. And this poem deals directly with that. Let's continue. One last thing I want to ask you. If we were doing this in regular class, if this wasn't, at home learning time, I would have you all in a poll. I would say, how many of you students believe that the first vampire poem ever, because by the way, this was the first written vampire poem of all time. Were there other vampire stories and poems out there? Yeah, probably. But this is the first one written down, right? This is 150 years before Dracula even. Dracula was 1898. This is 1748. So this is a long time before that. I lost my train of thought again. Anyway, let's continue. So let's read our poem and let's try to figure out if it's a vampire poem, right? Why it's a vampire poem for 3 good reasons. So again, going back to your assignment for tonight, you have 3 choices that you can make on your vampire story page. Is it a vampire story? 3 reasons why, and quotes. Is it not a vampire story? 3 reasons why, and quotes. And could you see that somebody would be mistaken and call it a vampire poem even though you believe it's not? So let's go. Let's read this poem. Now, I'm going to read all the notes that I have about it. I did a little bit of notes, and I'm also going to read the paragraph about it before we start reading this poem. So, I remember what I was talking about. I would ask you as a class, I would poll you as a class, do you believe that the first vampire poem ever written dealt with sex and romance? Because remember, it's very difficult to watch a vampire story, unless it's a children's vampire movie like Hotel Transylvania, or you watch Count on Sesame Street, right? That doesn't have any sexuality, thankfully, right? Those of us who have little kids would agree with that. That's good that you don't blend that in yet until teenage years, and then try to keep that out of things, right? But I ask you now. So again, do you agree that most vampire stories, not kids ones, have to do with sex and romance? Yeah, almost all of them. It's kind of wild if you think about it. Do you think the first vampire poem dealt with sexuality and romance, or was it just blood or whatnot? And I would raise your hand. And normally it's funny, about 50% of the kids say, I believe it had sex, and about 50% say no. And then I read the poem, and then they find out that the answer is absolutely the first vampire poem ever had sexuality in it, right? In fact, let me tell you what's going to happen in here. So this poem is about the seductive kiss of a vampire. And we're not talking about the kiss the way we're thinking of in our terms of a seductive kiss. I think they're talking more about the power that the kiss has. In other words, when they take their kiss, they put it on your neck and they pull out your blood. They can either kill you or turn you into one of them. So that's a very seductive kiss, right? I'll tell you more. This is an erotic poem. Yes, I said erotic poem that tells the tale of a scorned lover threatening to seduce an innocent maiden into his world of darkness. So what is a scorned lover? A scorned lover is somebody who has been jilted or dissed or just, rejected. I like rejected better. Totally told no. Somebody who goes to somebody, has a crush on somebody. I want you. Would you come with me? Would you marry me? And that person says, no, I don't want you. Sorry, you're out of here. That's a scorned lover. Now, if you're a good person and you're scorned, you move on to the next, another more fish in the sea. You find another lover to make your advances on, but not this guy. He believes his world, his dark world, is far superior to hers and her mom's pious teachings. Now, pious means religious. So we're finding out right off the bat, I'm telling you early, and you're going to find out kind of in the introduction, but it's easier with old poems like this for me to just feed things to you. In this poem, we're going to find out that the girl, not brainwashed by her mom, but she's been taught by her mom to follow one God, Jesus Christ, God himself, right? And not to go into these pagan other gods, to believe in multiple gods. And mom has told her, and by the way, Catholics believe this, like hardcore ones, Christians. Remember, I'm not telling you what to believe. I don't care. Just be a good person out there. But hardcore Christians believe that if you don't follow God, that you don't go to heaven. You're beat. Sorry. Only those really true and good people who follow the teachings of God and the Bible, those people get to go to heaven, and everybody else, not necessarily burns in hell. I'm not sure about that, but they definitely don't go to heaven, right? So this poem is about the fact that a mom has taught her daughter this belief system that you want to stay with God in order to have a good life and to go to heaven and live in eternity with God and his angels and all your loved ones who also are in heaven with you. This lover has gone to her and has tried to bring her over to his side. And she has said, no, not going to do it. She rejected him. She scorned him. He's decided to take her anyway. That's the evil of this poem. It's let me just tell you right there. He's actually presented, I'll tell you this at the end because I don't want to break it up too much. Let's read the beginning part. First, they're vampires have been part of literature for ages and ages now. Almost all of today's fiction authors have at least one vampire story out there. It's funny, it's true. I read this last year, and I remember one of my persnickety students said, and they said, what do you mean by that? And I said, it's funny. Most authors have dabbled in vampire literature, whether it's a short story or a novel or a TV show or whatever. And he said, well, I'm going to look up some authors and prove you wrong. I said, go, man, go. He said, well, let's look up, who's the guy who did Green Eggs and Ham? You know what I'm talking about. I'm having a brain freeze right now on his name, right? He wrote a vampire story. He then looked up other kids authors and found that all of them had vampire stories as well. So they're all out there. It's crazy how many people have written a vampire story. But let's continue. The recently released vampire anthology By Blood We Live has shown us that. There are many that think that it was the renowned Bram Stoker and his legendary novel Dracula that started it all. Not true. While Dracula and Mina's Tale most definitely made vampires and vampire fiction hugely popular, it is the most popular of the vampire literature, Dracula by far. In fact, we'll be reading it in about 2 weeks. It's quite excellent. It's not only a great story and really well written, but it does talk about the vampire in ways that kind of lists everything out for you. And it's become kind of like, pardon the pun, the vampire Bible. Let's continue. While Dracula and Mina's Tale most definitely made vampire fiction hugely popular, it wasn't the first vampire story written. Before Dracula, there was the quite popular Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, Ligeia by the sublimely sinister Edgar Allan Poe. That's a short story written in 1838, and we will be reading it in about a month or two. It's pretty well done. Varney the Vampire in 1847 by James Malcolm Reiner, and on and on. The list is crazy extensive. I'm going to tell you now, when I did my research for this class, I went out and I found hundreds of vampire poems. I wheedled them down to only 6. We're reading 6 of them, maybe 7. And the same thing with short stories. I found thousands of vampire short stories. I read way too many, and I picked out what I thought were the best, the funnest, the most fun, the coolest. Also the ones that have the best characteristics, and also not too desperately long, because I know you don't want to read crazy long things. So let's continue. But what was the very first vampire work of fiction? Who was the one to first create a creative piece of literature involving a vampire? Well, the answer to that is a poem by Heinrich August Ossenfelder titled Der Vampire, which came out in 1740. This poem is generally recognized as one of the very first appearances of a vampire in creative literature. Okay, now, oh, by the way, the word vampire started in the English language in 1734. And in this, we'll be doing some history on that about where, how the idea of it actually got started. A lot of people believe it had to do with the fact that people were dying and they didn't know things like tuberculosis and other diseases that, since they didn't understand, they said, well, it must be monsters coming in and killing us because we don't know what the heck's going on. We'll talk about that when we get to it. So, Der Vampire. It's been a long time coming. Let's read Der Vampire. Okay. Okay. Let's go. I'm going to read it out once. Just read right through it. Get a feel for it. See what you think it means right off the bat. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to read through it line by line. We're going to break it down line by line. And then we're done with this poem. Again, you don't have to like these poems. You don't. But you do have to understand them. So make sure you listen very carefully as I read through this. You're taking your own notes, you're highlighting, and you're making your own little side notes. Remember, you need 3 reasons why you believe this is a vampire poem, or 3 reasons why you believe it isn't a vampire poem, or 3 reasons why you think someone would think it's a vampire poem, but it's not. I'm going to tell you now, because this is the first assignment. This is definitely a vampire poem. I mean, it's actually says this is the first ever vampire poem ever written, so I know it's a vampire poem. You can use that as a quote as to why you believe it's a vampire poem as one of your 3 reasons. But let's go. Let's read this. Okay, Der Vampire. My dear young maiden clingeth unbending fast and firm to the long-held teaching of a mother ever true. As in vampires unmortal, folk on Theses' portal, hey like duck do believe. I'm sorry, hey duck like do believe. But my Christine thou dost dally, and wilt my loving parry, till I myself avenging, to a vampire's health a drinking, him toast and pale tokay. By the way, side note, timeout, this is by far the hardest poem we're going to read. It's almost like, what the heck is this guy talking about? It's almost that hard to understand. I'll break it down for you so you have nothing to worry about. And future poems tell more of a story. They're not very poetic. It's just a story about whether they're a vampire or not. So you will understand those a lot better than this. So if you're reading this first part and going, oh my God, I've taken the wrong class, I can't do this, chillax. Everything's going to be fine. I will I will break it all down for you. And the other poems, the future poems, you'll notice starting tomorrow, tell a story that is easy to follow and kind of fun and cool as well, in my nerdy Englishman opinion. But let's continue. And as softly as thou art sleeping, to thee shall I come creeping, and thy life's blood drain away. And so thou shalt be trembling, for thus shall I be kissing, and death's threshold thou will be crossing, with fear in my cold arms. At last shall I thee question, compared to such instruction, what are a mother's charms? So I'm going to say it again. He's presented as a digressive seducer and a metaphor for that which threatens the Catholic Church. So if you want to look at this metaphorically speaking, this poem is all about somebody who's contemplating leaving the Catholic Church. And this poem is a metaphor saying, don't do it, or you're in big trouble if you do. So it's like the church trying to scare people. But listen, there's more. It's basically about a man whose love is neglected by a respectable woman, and he is going to take her anyway is the decision that he's made. So he's actually presented as an aggressive seducer, more like a rapist. And he's a metaphor for that, again, which threatens the faith of Christians. So he comes to her while she's sleeping, and he kisses her, takes her blood from her, kills her, and turns her into a vampire. That's kind of a serious form of rape, if you ask me. Now, does he sexually take her? Besides just saying kissing her neck? No, I don't believe that happens in this. So when I say a rapist, I mean it in the form of he's raping from her soul, and also her link to God. Once you're turned into a vampire, and if you are like a real pious person and you live your whole life as, following the Catholic Church, doing everything, and then you get turned into a vampire right before the end of it, that's it. You're beat. Doesn't matter what you did. Your soul is gone. You're going to hell. You're burning with the devil for eternity. If you believe this stuff, remember, I'm just teaching you what they believe. So let's continue. Let's go back to the top. My dear young maiden clingeth, unbending, fast and firm. See, clingeth, unbending, fast and firm. So that means she's not getting rid of. She won't get rid of what we're going to talk about next, which is to the long-held teaching of a mother ever true. In other words, no matter what I tell this girl, she won't give up what her mom taught her. All right. She won't come to my side of things. She only follows her mom. Let's continue. As in vampires unmortal, folk on Theses portal, hey, like do believe. So what's Theses? Theses, by the way, is the second biggest river in Hungary, just so you know. And Hayduk is a semi-military official. I don't know what that has to do with the poem. I'm just telling you so you understand what those words mean. So it says, my dear young maiden clingeth, so she won't get rid of her mom's teaching, to the long-held teaching of a mother ever true. As in vampires unmortal. So I think she's saying that the mom taught her that these things are bad, these unmortal vampires. Folk on Theses portal, hey, like do believe that all these people around here, just like the mom, believe that vampires are bad. But my Christine, thou dost dally, and wilt my loving parry, till I myself avenging, to a vampire's health a drinking, him toast in pale Tokay. Now, Tokay is a well-known type of Hungarian wine, a red wine, right? So he says, but my Christine, thou dost dally, and with my loving parry, till I myself, he says, I'm not going to give up until you come over to my side, till I myself avenging, to a vampire's health a drinking, him toast and pale Tokay. So I'm going to keep trying until I actually have to come and drink your blood as if it was a fine wine. Let's continue. So basically in the first stanza, he's just describing this girl won't give up her mom's teaching. She won't go away from the Catholic Church. Well, I'm not taking no for an answer. Let's continue. And as softly thou art sleeping. So, and I mean, that really says something, that he comes and he does this to her in the middle of the night. You're going to find out that vampires have most of their powers around midnight. So he creeps to her while she's sleeping at her most, should be the safest time, right? When you're soft and safe in your bed. It's very scary, the idea that someone would get you at that point, because you really can't defend yourself. And thy life's blood drain away. So he's going to take away her blood. And so thou shalt be trembling, for thus shall I be kissing. So his kiss, again, the vampire's kiss, is draining her blood away. That's certainly an excellent quote to prove that this is I believe this is a vampire story, because he said he's going to drain her blood away. And then I give that quote, and thy life's blood drain away, in quotation marks. Boom, you're at the door. And thus shall I be kissing. And death's threshold, though it be crossing, and you're going to cross over and be dead. That's not cool. He's taking not only her soul, but her life. He's killing this woman with fear in my cold arms. And he says, you're going to cross over into death, and you're going to be scared. This is going to be terrible. And he tells her that. So again, if you're reading this, if you're like, somebody in 60 or 1755, and you're reading this and you're discussing with your soul or your family, should we switch over from paganism over to Catholicism? This poem might scare you to do it. You might say, well, if I don't, I could go to hell forever. I've got to stay away from these pagans, because these pagans are people like vampires, creatures like vampires, and they represent evil. So let's continue. With fear in my cold arms. And that's another thing. It's another characteristic of vampires, is they have no blood going through them, right? That's what keeps us warm, is our blood. Right? The blood pumps throughout your body, and it keeps you at 98.7 or somewhere around there degrees. It's your body temperature. Since vampires don't have blood in their body, they don't have a temperature. They're cold all the time. So it says it in my cold arms. And last shall I be questioned, compared to such instruction, what are a mother's charms? And then he says, after I've taken you and I've changed you and I've turned you into one of me, into one of us, into a vampire, what's a mother's teaching to that? I mean, you're going to die within, 50 or 100 years, whatever. If you live to your 60 or 70, you're considered lucky, especially in 1748. You'd be lucky if you lived to your 60, 75. And so then you're going to die, and that's the end for you. So what are her charms? My charms are better. My charms are, I can give you immortality. I can give you super powers. You can heal any cut and any wound at any time, right? Super fast healing. You're gonna find out that vampires have ESP, right? They can read minds. It's craziness. He says, what's that your mom teaches you compared to what I'm bringing you? And the answer to me is, Mr. Kenny, Andy Kenny in 2020 is, well, hey, bud, if you're thing, your vampirism, what you're selling, what you're stealing from people, what you're making them do, what you're forcing on them is so much better than mine, then why do you have to force it on me? And why do you have to force that on other people? Now, some people say that he's forcing this on her because he's in love with her, right? Because this is the girl that he's fallen for. And he figures if he turns her, then he can be with her forever. They can be lovers for eternity. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe he's just turning her. But then again, I ask you this, ladies, if a man wants you, or men, if a girl wants you, or a person, a lover wants you, whatever, whoever it is, whatever the sex, and you don't want them and they force it on you in such an awful and evil way, are you then going to turn around and go, oh, my baby, my lover, since we're this way, let's be together forever? Reminds me of, I'm going to give you a little side note, with Frankenstein and the novel Frankenstein, which you would have been reading if you took regular senior English. Kind of the same thing happens. The monster Frankenstein forces the doctor to make him a woman, and the woman comes out, and he figures that, because he made her a woman and they're both awful and ugly and evil and terrible, that they would be that way together. But the woman looks at at Frankenstein, the female monster looks at Frankenstein, the male monster, and says, I'm sorry, at the creature. Frankenstein is the doctor. She looks at the creature, goes, ew, I'm not coming anywhere near you. And it doesn't work. And I see kind of the same thing here. How could, if you force a person, a scorned lover, over to your side by killing them and turning them into an undead, are they going to turn around and go, hey, gee, thanks, you were right all along. This is great. No, especially not if they're so pious and Catholic. So there you go. We've read Der Vampire. Very short. It's going to be the shortest poem. And also, I've already told you, this is definitely the hardest poem we're going to read. You should have a few reasons as to why you believe this is a vampire story, from the title to the fact that he drinks her blood, that he has cold arms, that he creeps in, that he's going to bring her over to death. Where does he say this? The death's threshold, though it'll be crossing. So he tells her, you'll be crossing death's threshold, but we're going to be chilling together. And how great is that? So clearly this is vampire literature. I also want to just point out again that the first vampire poem definitely had sexuality, romance, violence, and death all in there, all in these what is it, like 18 lines, 20 lines, all forced into that. Is pretty well done. Side note, you're going to be writing an essay for me in a couple of months about why the vampire legend has endured over these many years. You're going to give many reasons why, right? Sex, violence, cool characteristics, Catholic Church characteristics, all these things form together to have kept this vampire legend alive. Do you think it's important in an essay talking about how vampirism has continued for so long to mention the first poem ever written? I think it is. So somewhere in your essay, make sure you talk about Der Vampire and bring back the fact that the first piece of vampire literature had all the things that people find interesting in vampire literature and movies 300 years later. It's the same things that keep people watching, right? So that might be a good reason why it continues today, because it had such a firm base that it was built on. And people looked at this and said, hey, I can take this story. I can take the idea of a creature that has all these cool characteristics and uses romance and sex to get people to him, that lures women and men in order to eat them and then either kill them completely or turn them into part of their own undead creatures. Why? Because sex and romance is something that everybody's interested in. Certainly once you hit teenage years and above, people get interested in that. It's something that draws people's attention. For obvious reasons. Also, blood and violence draws people's attention as well. The idea of killing your enemy, the idea of watching other people hurt and kill other people when you know you're safe. It's just a story and you can sit back, have some popcorn and go, woo, it wasn't me. So that's another thing. There's so many reasons why the vampire legend still endures so many years later. And Der Vampire was the first. Fabulous job, everybody. I'm sorry I went on forever and forever about so many different things, but this is the first poem, so you had to hear it all. And as we move on, as we read our next poem, and we'll be doing that in our next class or the class after that, I won't do all the beginning intro stuff. All right, you now know about paganism and Catholicism, the idea of many gods and one God, and how the Catholics came in and said, you can't root for many gods. That's evil. That's wrong. If you do that, you won't go to heaven. And then all of a sudden, one of those things that they created possibly was the vampire. So if you don't come to our church, if you don't believe in our God, then the vampire might come for you, and you might be, soulless for eternity. That's scary to a lot of people. It scares me, man. I don't know if there's a heaven or a hell. I don't know if there's a God, but you know what? I'm going to live the best life that I can, so that if there is, I'll be on the right side of things. If not, okay, whatever. It's darkness. Doesn't matter anyway. But if there is, OMG, I want to be on that right side of things. And again, I'm going to say it one last time. I'll say it a lot throughout the semester, but today, never am I telling you to believe in God or be a Catholic or be a pagan or be anything. No, I'm just teaching you this course, and I can't do it without talking about these things because they're ingrained in all the literature that we're going to be reading. You will see. Just be good people. I am telling you that. Be a good person. Have a great day. Remember, your homework for tonight, get that vampire story page filled out. Fabulous job. Thank you very much.